The prairie at night was a world of silence, where only the whisper of the wind and the call of distant owls kept a man company. Elijah, a lone cowboy riding home after a long day, guided his weary horse across the plains. The stars stretched endlessly overhead, cold and sharp as watchful eyes. Then through that hush came a sound that did not belong, a faint, trembling cry, like the voice of an infant, weak but desperate. Elijah froze. His heart pounded. No child belonged out here in the emptiness. Yet there it was again, a whisper carried on the wind, "Mama?" Dismounting, Elijah searched the grass with a lantern, its glow throwing long, trembling shadows. That was when he saw it, a tattered sack lying abandoned near the rocks, its fabric damp and faintly glowing as though touched by moonlight itself. The cries came from within. His hands shook as he untied the knot, and when the sack fell open, a baby stared up at him with eyes too old, too knowing for a child so small. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. This was no ordinary discovery, it was the beginning of something neither man nor world could easily explain. Far from the endless prairie lay the small frontier village of Ash Hollow. Life there was simple, marked by dawn prayers, the tending of fields, and evenings around firelit gatherings. The people, both settlers and those of the nearby Lakota tribe, shared uneasy harmony, bound by necessity more than trust. Children played by the riverbanks, hunters brought back game, and old women told stories of spirits that lingered where the earth still carried wounds from forgotten battles. Elijah, though an outsider, was known as a quiet, hard-working cowboy, never one to stir trouble, never one to ask for more than silence and a roof. But that night, as the prairie winds howled, Elijah sat in his cabin with the mysterious infant swaddled in blankets before the fire. The child's cries had faded into silence, replaced by watchful, unblinking eyes that seemed to study him. Elijah shifted uneasily. The shadows flickered strangely against the walls, and sometimes he swore he heard faint whispers between the crackling of the logs. Sleep would not come easily. He had saved a life, yes, but deep inside, something warned him that this child carried a weight far beyond its years. The next day he carried the child to the edge of the river, where he met Wicasa, an elder of the Lakota. The man's eyes, dark as storm clouds, fell upon the baby, and widened in alarm. "You found it," Wicasa murmured. "The child of the sack. It is touched by the spirit mother, she who roams where life was taken unjustly. To care for it is to invite her shadow." Elijah tried to argue, but the elder shook his head. "Some voices are not meant to be answered. Return it to the earth, or she will come." Those words clung to Elijah like burrs in his soul. That night, the cabin turned colder than the wind outside. Elijah awoke to whispers swirling in the rafters, threading through the cracks in the walls. He lit a lamp, but the glow only deepened the corners into darker pits. The baby lay silent, eyes wide, and when Elijah leaned closer, he swore the whispers bent toward the child as if drawn to its breath. The room seemed to breathe with him, shadows swelling and shrinking as though alive. He tightened his grip on the lantern, praying for dawn. Days passed and the prairie grew restless. Clouds rolled heavy and black, and the storm came with a fury. Thunder split the skies while rain hammered the cabin roof. Yet beneath the roar, Elijah still heard them, the whispers sharper now, like hundreds of unseen voices crying out in grief. He clutched the child to his chest, rocking it as lightning carved white scars across the windows. Each strike seemed to reveal shapes moving in the storm, women draped in tattered veils, faces hidden, drifting closer with every flash of light. Unable to bear it, Elijah saddled his horse in the deluge and rode hard across the soaked plains, the infant wrapped close to him. The rain stung like needles, the mud pulled at hooves, and behind him, the storm gave chase like a living thing. The cries of the child rose with the thunder, piercing, mournful, almost inhuman. Elijah urged the horse faster, praying for shelter, for salvation, for anything that might end the terror gathering at his heels. When at last he staggered back into his cabin, drenched and trembling, he set the child down, only to see the shadows convulse. They lengthened, pulling from the corners, stretching into monstrous forms with eyes that glowed like embers. The walls shuddered, the air pressed thick against his chest. The whispers became screams. Elijah clutched the Bible from his table, raising it high, but even holy words seemed to falter in that suffocating darkness. Then she appeared, the Spirit Mother. Tall, draped in a shroud that billowed though no wind stirred, her hands pale and skeletal yet trembling with longing. She reached for the child, her form half light, half shadow, her presence overwhelming the small cabin. The baby, silent till then, let out a cry that shook the rafters, as though answering a call it had always known. Elijah's knees buckled beneath the weight of the moment. Her face was both beautiful and horrifying, eyes bottomless with sorrow, cheeks streaked with endless tears that carved into flesh, lips trembling with words too broken to be spoken. She did not rage, she mourned. Every whisper Elijah had heard, every shadow, every storm, was her grief made flesh. "Mama," the baby whispered again, and for an instant, Elijah felt the unbearable weight of her love and her curse pressing into his heart. When dawn finally came, the Spirit Mother was gone. The cabin lay in ruin, beams scorched, walls scarred with handprints burned deep into the wood. Elijah sat slumped against the hearth, the baby still in his arms, alive but strangely calm. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the prairie washed clean, as though the night's horrors had been swallowed by the earth. But Elijah knew better. Their silence was only a pause. When Elijah brought the child into Ash Hollow days later, the villagers would not meet his eyes. They whispered as he passed, of curses, of spirits, of the fool cowboy who carried death in his arms. Mothers drew their children close, and even friends kept their distance. Wicasa only shook his head, sadness carved deep into his face. "You have chosen," he said simply. And Elijah knew he had bound himself to a fate that would not end easily. Years slipped by, and the child grew into a boy, strong and sharp-eyed, but with a quietness that unnerved even Elijah. At times, he would sit by the riverbank for hours, listening to nothing, or wander into the fields and stand unmoving as though waiting for something to arrive. Elijah loved him as a son, yet in the boy's gaze there lingered that same too-old knowing, the same silence that had first chilled his heart. One evening, long after Elijah had grown gray and weary, the boy stood alone on the prairie under a rising moon. The wind swept over the grass, and in its breath came that word again, soft as memory, sharp as a wound, "Mama." His lips moved, repeating it, eyes glowing faintly in the night. And though no one was there to see, the prairie seemed to bend closer, as though listening. And perhaps, just beyond sight, she still waited.